It belted down in the village of Sabre. All the windows and doors were slammed tight shut, because this was a monsoon rain driving in right across the country from the southwest. No one would have set foot outside home because the wind and rain would have swept anyone away straight off the mountain. Outside, great gushes of water cascaded down the steep main trail through the village. It sounded like we were in the middle of a river, the water racing past the front door. An area like this cannot, of course, flood up there, because the gradient is far too steep to hold water, but it can sure as hell get wet. And we had rock and mud roof that was sound, but I was wondering how some of the households down below us were getting along. Everything here is communal, including the cooking, so I guess everyone was just crowded in together in the undamaged houses out of the rain. Up above us, the mountaintops were lit with great bolts of forked lightning, ice blue in color, jagged, electric neon in sky. Thunder rolled across the Hindu Kush. Gulab and I got down close to the thick wall at the back of the room because our own home was by no means watertight. But the rain was not driving through the gapes in the rock and mud. Our spot was dry, but we were still deafened and dazzled by this atrocity of nature raging outside. This level of storm was unnerving, but when it goes for as long as this one, you become accustomed to its fury. Every time I looked out the window, the lightning flashed and cracked above the highest peaks, but occasionally it illuminated the sky beyond our immediate range of hills, and that was just the creepiest sight you've ever seen, like the wicked witch of the Kush was about to come hurtling through the sky on a broomstick. Lightning out front, naked and violent, is one thing, but similar bolts hidden from view, turning the heavens into a weird electric blue, made a landscape like this look unearthly, enormous black summits stark against the universe. It was a forbidding sight for a wounded warrior more used to the great flat plains of Texas. But slowly I became used to it and finally fell deep asleep flat out on the floor. Our departure time of 2300 came and went, and still the rain lashed out. Midnight came, and with it its new calendar date, Sunday, July 3rd, which this year would be the midpoint of the 4th of July weekend, and a time for celebration all over the United States of America, at least in most parts, except for those in the profound mourning for those lost special forces. While I was sitting out the storm, the mood back home and the ranch, according to Mom, was very depressed. I had been missing in action for 5 days. The throng gathered in our front yard now numbered at least or almost 300. They never left, but the crowd was growing very solemn. There was still a police cordon around the property. The local sheriffs had been joined by the judges, and the state police were busy providing personal escorts in the form of cruisers to accompany SEALs on their twice daily training runs front and rear. Attending the daily prayers were local firemen, construction men, ranchers, bookstore owners, engineers, mechanics, teachers, 2 charter boat fishing captains. There were salesmen, mortgage brokers, lawyers from Houston, and local attorneys, all of them fighting off my demise in the best way they knew how. Mom says the whole place was lit up all night by the lights from the automobiles. Someone had brought in porta-cabins, and there seemed to be a little point in people going anywhere, not until they knew whether I was still alive. According to Mom, they separated into groups, one offering prayers every hour, others singing hymns, others drinking beers. Local ladies who had known Morgan and I all of our lives were unable to hold back their tears. All of them were in attendance for one reason, to comfort my parents if the worst should be announced. I don't know how much about other states, but my experience in California had been strictly sheltered by Spec Warcom compound. But in my opinion, that nearly week-long vigil carried out in the entirety impromptu manner by the people of Texas says a huge amount about them, their compassion, their generosity, and their love for their stricken neighbors. Mom and Dad did not know all of them by any means, but no one will ever forget the single-minded purpose of their visits. They just wanted to help in any way they could. They just wanted to be there because their own was lost on the battlefield far, far away. As the weekend wore on, no stars and stripes were flying. I guess they were not sure whether to raise them at half-mast or not. My dad said it was obvious people were becoming disheartened. The sheer regularity of the signal by phone coming from Coronado, no news. The grimness of the media announcing stuff like, hope is fading for the missing Navy SEALs. Seems like the early reports of the death of all 4 will be proved to be accurate. Texas family mourns their loss. Navy still refusing to confirm SEAL's death. It beats the hell out of me. In the military, if we don't know something, we say we don't know and proceed to shut up until we do know. Some highly paid charlatans in the media think it's absolutely fine to take a wild guess at the truth and tell a couple million of people it's cast iron facts, just in case they might be right. Well, I hope they're proud of themselves, because they nearly broke my mom's heart. And if it had not been for the stern authority of Senior Chief Petty Officer Chris Guthrow, I think she might have had a nervous breakdown. That morning he found her in the house, privately crying, and right then, Senior Chief Guthrow stepped in. He stood her up, turned her around, and ordered her to look him straight in the eye. Listen, Holly, he said. Marcus is missing in action. That's MIA in our language. That's all. Missing means what it says. It means we cannot at present locate him. It does not mean he's dead. And he's not dead until I tell you he's dead. Understand? We do not have a body. We do not have a movement on the ground. We cannot tell right now who it is or how many there are, but no one, repeat, no one in Spec Warcom believes he is dead. I want you to understand that clearly. The austere words of a professional must have hit home. Mom rallied after that, aided and comforted by Morgan, who still claimed he was in contact with me and that whatever else was happening, I was not dead. There were now 35 SEALs on the property, including Commander Jeff Bender, Admiral McGuire's public relations officer, and a fantastic encouragement to everyone. Navy SEAL Chaplain Trey Vaughn from Coronado was a spiritual pillar of strength. Everyone wanted to talk to him, and he dealt with it with optimism and hope. When the mood was becoming morbid and there were too many people in tears, he would urge them to be positive. Stop that crying right now. We need you. We need your prayers, and Marcus needs your prayers. But most of all, we need your energy. No giving up. Hear me? No one will ever forget Trey Vaughn. There were also 2 naval chaplains from the local command who just showed up out of nowhere. Chief Bruce Missick, the Navy recruiter boss from Houston, who'd known me a long time, turned up and never left. As the days had worn on, the shipments of food started to arrive from the Gulf ports to the south. Fresh shrimp, catfish, and other white fish. One lady brought an enormous consignment of sushi every day, and families who had spent generations in the South stuck hard that by old Southern tradition of bringing covered dishes containing pots of chicken and dumplings to a funeral. Dad thought it was a bit premature, but there were a lot of people to feed, and he assumed a loose command of the cooking. Everyone was grateful for everything. He says it was strange, but there was never a question of anyone going home. They were just going to stay, for better or worse. Meanwhile, back in the freaking thunderstorm, more than 30 pounds lighter than I was when I first set off on this mission, I was sleeping like a child. Gulab said it was 0300. It had been raining for nearly 6 hours without ever slowing up. I was out to the world. The first time I had slept soundly for a week. Oblivious to the weather, oblivious to the Taliban. I slept right through the night and woke up in broad daylight after the rain. I checked my watch and rounded on Gulab. I was supposed to be in Montague, for Christ's sakes. Why the hell hadn't he made sure I was there? What kind of guide was he allowing me to oversleep? Gulab was sanguine, and since we were growing very efficient at communicating, he was able to tell me he knew it was the first time I had been able to sleep in a long time, and he thought it would be better to leave me. Anyway, he said, we could not have possibly have gone out there in weather because it was too dangerous. The overnight walk to Montague was out of the question. One way or another, I took this all pretty badly. I actually stormed out of the house, racked by yet another disappointment. After the helicopters never came, Sarway's son vanishing while I was in the cave, the village elder taking off without me, and now the trip to Montague in ruins. Christ, could I ever believe a goddamn word these people said? I'd been asleep for so long, I decided to indulge myself in a luxurious and prolonged pee. I walked outside wearing my harness and a very sour expression, temporarily forgetting entirely that I owed my life to the people of this village. I left my rifle behind and walked slowly down the steep hill, which was now slippery as hell because of the rain. At the conclusion of this operation, I took myself up the hill a little way and sat on the drying grass, mainly because I did not wish to be any ruder to Gulab than I had already been, but also because I just wanted to sit alone for a while and nurse my thoughts. I still considered my best bet would be to find a way to get to the nearest American military base, and that was still Montague. I stared up at the towering mountains that I would have to cross, and the rain and dew now glinting off the early morning sun, and I think I visibly flinched. It really would be one heck of a climb, and my leg was aching already, not at any thought, but because I had walked 100 yards. Bullet wounds tend to take a while to heal up. Also, despite Sauer's bold efforts, the leg was, I knew, still full of shrapnel, which would not be much of help towards any pain-free stroll over the peak. Anyway, I just sat there on the side of the mountain and tried to clear my mind, and decide whether there was anything else I could do except sit around and wait for the new night when Gulab and the guys could assist me to Montague. and all the time I was weighing the possibility of the Taliban coming in on some vengeful attack in retribution for yesterday's bombardment. The fact was, I was a living, breathing target as well as a distress signal. There sat the mighty Sharmak with his second in command, Commodore Abdul, and a large trained army, all of them with essentially nothing else to do except kill me. And if they managed to make it into the village and hit the house I was staying in, I'd be lucky to fend them off and avoid a short trip to Pakistan for publicity and execution. Christ, those guys would have loved nothing more in all the world to grab me and announce to the Arab television station that they had defeated one of the top U.S. Navy SEAL teams. Not just defeated, wiped out in the battle, smashed the rescue squad, blown up the helicopter, executed all survivors, and here they had the last one. The more I thought about it, the more unintendable my position seemed to be. Could the goatherds of Sabre band together and fight shoulder to shoulder to save me? Or would the brutal killers of Al Qaeda and the Taliban in the end get their way? It was odd, but I still did not realize the full power of Lohai. No one had fully explained it to me. I knew there was something, but that ancient tribal law was still a mystery to me. I stared around the hills, but I could see no one outside of the village. Gulab and his guys always behaved as if every mountainside was alive with hidden danger, and while he did not make my mind much of an alarm clock, he had to be an expert on the bandit country which surrounds his own Sabre. It was thus with rising concern that I saw Gulab racing down the hill toward me. He literally dragged me into a standing position, then pulled me down the trail leading to the lower reaches of the village. He was running and trying to make me keep up with him. He kept shouting, signaling, and again, Taliban are here, in the village, run, Dr. Marcus, run for God's sakes, run. He pushed his shoulder up and under my left arm to bear some of my fast-dwindling weight, and I half hobbled, half ran, half fell down the hill. Of course, my own recent standards, this was like a stroll on the beach. I suddenly realized that we might have to fight, and I'd left my rifle back in the house. I had my ammunition in the harness, but nothing to fire, and now it was my turn to yell, Gulab, stop, I don't have my gun. He replied something I took for an Afghan, what a complete fucking idiot you turned out to be. But whatever had put the fear of God into him was still straight there, and he had no intention of stopping until he located refuge for us. We ducked and dived through the lower village trails until he found the house he was looking for. Gulab kicked the door open, rammed it shut behind him, and helped me down onto the floor. And there I sat, unarmed, largely useless, and highly apprehensive about what might happen in the next hour. Gulab, without a word, opened the door and took off at high speed. He went past the window like a rocket, running up the gradient, possibly going for the Hindu Kush all-comers 100-meter record. God knows where he was going, but he'd gone. 3 minutes later, he kicked the door open and came charging back in the house. He was carrying my rifle as well as his own AK-47. I had 75 rounds left. I think he had more in his own ammunition belt. Gravely, he handed me my Mark 12 sniper rifle and simply said, Taliban, Dr. Marcus, we fight. He looked more serious than I'd ever seen him, not afraid, just full of determination. Up on that mountain, when he had first seen me, Sarawak had made the decision with his buddies that I, a wounded American, would be granted Lohai. The doctor knew perfectly well, from this first moment, by the gushing mountain river, that situation might ultimately come to this, even if I didn't. It was a decision that, right from the start, had affected everyone in the village. I think most people had accepted it, and it was obvious been endorsed by the village elder. I'd seen a few angry faces full of hatred, but they were not in the majority, and now the village chief of law and order, Muhammad Gulab, was prepared to stand by that unspoken vow his people had given to me. He was doing it not for personal gain, but out of a sense of honor that reached back down the generations, 2,000 years of Pashtunwali tradition. You will defend your guest to the death. I watched Gulab carefully as he rammed a new magazine into his AK. This was a man preparing to step right up to the plate, and I saw the light of goodness in his dark eyes, the way you always do when someone is making a brave and selfless action. I thanked Gulab and banged a new magazine into my rifle. I stared out the window and assessed the battlefield. We were low down and almost on flat terrain, but the Taliban's attack would be launched from a higher ground, the way they always preferred it. I wondered how many other rock and mud houses in Sabre were shielding men who were about to fight. The situation was serious, but not dire. We had excellent cover, and I don't think the enemy knew precisely where I was. So far as I could see, the battle for Murphy's Ridge represented a two-edged sword. First of all, the tribesmen could be seething with fury about the number of guys killed in action by Mikey, Axe, Danny, and me. This might even be a suicide bomber or attack so reckless they'd risk any number of warriors just to get me. I wasn't crazy about either option. On the other hand, they might be slightly scared at the prospect of facing even one of the tiny American team that had wiped out possibly 50% of the Taliban assault force. Sure, they knew I was wounded, but they also knew I would be well armed by the villagers, even if I had lost my own rifle. I guess they would either throw everything at me, the hell with the expense, or take it real steady, fighting their way through the village, house by house, until they had Gulab and me cornered. But an impending attack requires quick, expert planning. I needed to operate fast and make Gulab understand our tactics. He immediately gave way to my experience, which made me think he had never quite accepted my story about being a doctor. He knew I had fought on that ridge, and right now he was ready to do my bidding. We had two areas to cover, the door and the window. It wouldn't have been much if I had been blasting away through the window at the Taliban down the street when a couple of those sneaky little bastards crept through the front door and shot me in the back. I explained it was up to Gulab to cover the entrance. To make sure, I had a split second I would need to swing around and cut him down before they could open fire. Ideally, I would have preferred him to issue an early warning that the enemy was coming. That way, I might have been able to get into the shadows in the corners and take them out, maybe 6 at a time, instead of just gunning down the leader. Ideally, I would like to have a heavy piece of furniture to ram in front of the door, just to buy me a little extra time. But there was no furniture, just those big cushions, which were obviously not sufficiently heavy. Anyway, Gulab understood the strategy and nodded fiercely, the way he always did when he was sure of something. "Okay, Marcus," he said. It did not escape me he had dropped the doctor part. When the battle began, Gulab would man the end of the window that gave him the best dual view of the door. I would concentrate on whatever frontal assault might be taking place. I'd need to shoot steady and straight, wasting nothing, like Axe and Danny did in the mountain, while Mikey called the shots. I tried to tell Gulab to stay calm and shoot straight, nothing hysterical. That way we'd win, or at most cause a disorderly Taliban retreat. He looked a bit vacant. I could tell he was not understanding, so I hit him with the old phrase we always use before a conflict. "Okay, guys, let's rock and roll." Matter of fact, that was worse. Gulab thought I was about to give him dancing lessons. It might have been funny if the situation had not been so serious. Then they both heard the opening burst of gunfire high up in the village. There was a lot of it, too much. The sheer volume of fire was ridiculous, unless the Taliban were planning to wipe out the entire population of Sabre. And I knew they would not consider that, because the slaughter would surely end all support from those tribal villages up here in the mountains. No, they would not do that. They wanted me, but they would never kill another 100 Afghan people, including women and children, in order to get me. The Taliban and their al-Qaeda cohorts were mercilessly cruel, but this Ben Shamrock was not stupid. Besides, I detected no battlefield rhythm to the gunfire. It was not being conducted with short, sharp bursts of trained men going for a target. It came in prolonged volleys, and I listened carefully. There was no obvious return fire, and right then I knew what was happening. These lunatics had come rolling out of the trees into the villages, firing randomly into the air and aiming at nothing, the way they often do, all jumpy up and down and shouting, "Death to infidel!" Stupid pricks. Their loose objective was always to frighten the life out of people. And right now they seemed to be succeeding. I could hear women and children crying, but no return fire from the tribesmen of Sabre. I knew precisely what the sound would like, and I was not hearing it. I looked at Gulab. He braced for action, leaning in the window with me, one eye on the front door. We both clicked our safety catches open. Up and above, we could still hear the screaming, but the gunfire subsided. Little sons of bitches were probably beating up the kids, which might have inspired me to get right back up there and take the whole jihadist army single-handed, but I held back, held my fire, waited. We waited for about 45 minutes, and then it was quiet, as if they had never been there. That unseen village calm had returned, and there was no sense of panic or sign of injured people. I left it to Gulab to call this one. "Taliban gone," he simply said. "What happens now?" I asked. "Bagram?" Gulab shook his head. "Bagram," he said, then he signaled from the umpteenth time, "Helicopter will come." I rolled my eyes heavenward. I heard this helicopter crap before, and I had news for Gulab. "Helicopter no come," I told him. "Helicopter come," he replied.